I am really excited about this topic because it's near and dear to my heart, not only because I work in a museum in a digital department, but I also teach a class called Museums in the Digital Age for the Johns Hopkins University, as does JD, and I think one of our students is here tonight. So what my task is to kind of just give you a taste of what that topic is. The class I teach is 13 weeks. I have 5 minutes, so we'll compress and just, I think, throw out some common threads that will come up during tonight's presentation. So I would like to start out, the class that I teach talks about sort of the history, a little bit of the context of the history of museums from ancient times until today. And so I just want to throw out 3 kind of themes that are often used to characterize what is unique about museums. And one of them is that museums are places. Another is that museums collect and display objects. And the third is that museums educate the public. And what I want to do is think about those 3 statements in the context of the digital age. And I always like to think of this quote by John Cotton Dana, who was a visionary museum director about 100 years ago. And he authored The New Museum, and this is one of his many pithy quotes where he says, "The worth of a museum is in its use, not its gorgeous building, not its world-class collections, not even its amazing experts, in its use." And so I want to think about, in the digital age, how is the use and usefulness of museums impacted? That's what we'll do for the next 3 minutes, and then I look forward to hearing what our presenters have to say about those themes as well, of museums as places, museums that collect and display objects, and museums that educate. So museums are places. Visitors come to museums. Visitors also come through the web. They come to explore, and this is an app that you'll be hearing about tonight. They visit virtually. This is visiting an institution through the Google Street View through the Google Art Project. Visitors visit via robots, and this is the beam robots that we're talking about. Theme here. Museums are indeed places, but in the digital age, museums are not just places. They are really everywhere, and so are our visitors. So on to the second theme, museums collect and display objects. This is certainly true, but what are objects? Here's an example of a conceptual art piece by Saul Lewitt, a wall drawing, in which what a museum actually acquires is the set of instructions to make this work of art, which can then be made over and over again. A digital version of this might be that museums collect ideas and intangibles, such as the @ symbol collected by MoMA a few years ago, and the Cooper Hewitt, which collected open source software code, which is sort of the digital equivalent of bringing on a new living, breathing zebra. This is something that is an idea, but it's also alive because it's open source and being constantly changed and growing. Museum visitors do view objects, but how they do it in the digital age might be different. Museum visitors also make objects, and here's an example of teens creating digitally at the Hirshhorn's Art Lab plus up the street. And I believe Ryan Hill has presented at DASER before about that project. Museum makers also hack objects. You're going to hear more. Oh, sorry. So I'll skip past that. You'll hear more about that at the Met. Great stuff. We know that objects are unique physical things. This is the gunboat Philadelphia up the street at American History. But here's that same object as 3D data that can be printed by anyone. So what is an object in the digital age, and where does it live, and how is it used? We know that objects can be skeletons, but digital objects can also be much more than skeletons, and this is another of the projects you'll hear about tonight. So finally, the third statement often used to describe museums is that museums are here to educate the public. But the public also educates the public. And here's an example. In the digital age, anyone can be a content creator and publisher. And here's a project where kids narrate audio tours of the art at MoMA. The public also helps educate museums. So here's an example up the street at the Smithsonian Institution Archives where the public has helped identify people in historic photographs, which then becomes part of the record of those collections at the Smithsonian. People access museum data. This is an example from the Tate where they've published their collections data on GitHub for download. And then someone took that data and created a visualization from it showing the collections. It's hard to see here, but sort of the chronology of when those items were made. And here's an example from Matthew Lincoln, who you'll hear from later, so I won't trump him either, other than to say that people use museum data in interesting ways. People also add their data to museums. So there are many examples of this, but this is one where you can add your story about the events of September 11th. And that data then becomes part of a museum's collection. And finally, Wikipedia, the free encyclopedia that anyone can edit, is increasingly a shared space where museums and the public can learn, share, and publish together. Here's an example of a Wikipedia edit-a-thon at the National Museum of Women in the Arts, where they were really focusing on training women to be Wikipedia editors because they're highly underrepresented on Wikipedia. So training people like us to edit Wikipedia about women artists. And so that was kind of their focus for Women's History Month. So these examples to me show how teaching and learning in the digital age with regards to museums is a much more collaborative endeavor than simply museums educate the public. So in sum, nearly 50 years ago was around the time that the first museums began using computers, and the National Museum of Natural History was one of the first. You'll hear more from them. We've come a long way in those 50 years, and tonight we'll explore some of the latest innovations in digital technologies. And so again, here is my question again to you to think about tonight. How is the use and usefulness of museums impacted in the digital age, and specifically thinking about how are they impacted as places or spaces, as object repositories, and as educational institutions. I'm looking forward to hearing about the projects tonight that push the boundaries of what museums are, what they collect, and how they enhance learning in the digital age. Thank you.